JD Vance had been through many battles in his life, whether it was escaping poverty, serving in the Marines, or navigating the cutthroat world of politics. But nothing quite prepared him for what happened that evening in downtown Washington, D.C. It had been a long day of Senate hearings, policy meetings, and the usual chaos of American politics. The Ohio senator just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner before heading back to his hotel. He'd heard good things about the Capitol Fork, a trendy, upscale restaurant known for its fusion cuisine and elite clientele. His team had made a reservation and everything seemed in order until he stepped inside. The hostess, a young woman with piercing blue eyes and a stiff demeanor, scanned him up and down. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice clipped and formal. "We can't accommodate you this evening." JD furrowed his brow. "Excuse me? We have a right to refuse service. You'll need to leave." His security detail exchanged confused glances, and his assistant, Mark, stepped forward. "There must be a mistake. We booked a table." The hostess's gaze didn't waver. "It's not a mistake. We don't serve people who promote dangerous rhetoric." The words hit him like a slap. JD had seen businesses take political stances before, but this, being denied service outright because of his views, his stomach tightened. He could already see the headlines forming in his mind. Conservative senator denied service at D.C. hotspot. A hush fell over the restaurant. Other diners had turned to watch. Some whispered. A few smirked. The tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. JD inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to give them the outburst they wanted. Instead, he did something that no one expected. He smiled. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "If that's how you feel, I respect your right as a business. But let me tell you something, what you're doing here tonight is bigger than just me. You think you're taking a stand, but you're setting a dangerous precedent. One day, it won't just be conservatives like me. It'll be someone else you disagree with. And that's not justice. That's not democracy." With that, JD turned on his heel and strode out, leaving the entire restaurant in stunned silence. What happened next, however, would shake the country to its core. JD Vance walked out of the Capitol Fork with his security detail and assistant trailing behind him. The cool DC air hit his face, but he hardly noticed. His mind raced. He had been insulted, sure, but this was about something bigger. It wasn't just a personal slight. It was a warning shot in a larger cultural battle. His assistant, Mark, broke the silence. "Sir, we should get ahead of this before the media spins it." JD exhaled. "No need. The media's gonna do what they always do. But let's make sure they don't own the story. I'll respond in my own way." They climbed into his black SUV, and before the car even pulled away from the curb, JD pulled out his phone and opened Twitter. He typed deliberately, each word carrying weight. "I was just denied service at the Capitol Fork in D.C. because of my political beliefs. They think this is a win for tolerance. But this is a slippery slope. What happens when they come for you? When they silence you? This isn't about me. It's about all of us. Hashtag stand for freedom." He hit send. Within minutes, the tweet exploded. Conservative influencers, fellow politicians, and everyday Americans began flooding the replies. Some were furious at the restaurant, calling for a boycott. Others used it as proof that political discrimination was out of control. And then came the other side. Liberals mocked him, some even celebrating the denial. The phrase, "cry harder," JD trended. Late-night comedians made jokes at his expense, painting him as a fragile politician playing the victim. But JD wasn't done. "Mark," he said, his eyes glinting, "book me a spot on Tucker's show tonight." His assistant nodded. "I'm on it." That evening, JD Vance sat under the bright studio lights across from Tucker Carlson, the most watched conservative commentator in the country. The Fox News host wasted no time. "So, JD," Tucker said, shaking his head in disbelief, "a sitting U.S. senator gets denied service at a restaurant? In America? What is happening to this country?" JD leaned forward. "This isn't just about me, Tucker. This is about the fundamental principles of free speech and civil discourse. The left preaches tolerance, but only for people who agree with them. The second you challenge their worldview, they want you gone. The segment struck a nerve. Over 3 million people tuned in. Social media erupted again, and by morning, the Capitol Fork found itself drowning in controversy. But JD had one more move to make. By the next morning, the Capitol Fork was in crisis mode. Angry one-star reviews flooded Yelp. Conservative news outlets dug into the restaurant's political ties. A few prominent donors of left-wing causes were exposed as regular patrons. The owner, a well-known liberal activist, tried to stay silent, but reporters camped outside the restaurant demanded a response. JD Vance, however, wasn't just sitting back and watching. He was planning his next move. Sitting in his Senate office, he scrolled through the reactions. His phone buzzed nonstop, calls from allies, interview requests, messages from constituents. But one email caught his attention. Subject: "You should visit our diner." It was from a small family-owned restaurant in rural Ohio. The owners, a middle-aged couple, wrote about how they had been struggling in an economy that seemed to favor big city elites over small-town businesses. They invited JD to their diner, saying, "We serve everyone here, no matter their politics. If you're ever in town, we'd love to have you." That gave JD an idea. He turned to Mark. "Call a press conference. But not in D.C. We're taking this to Ohio." 2 days later, JD stood in front of a packed crowd in his home state, in front of Mary's Country Diner. A small, no-frills restaurant in a town where factories had closed but families still held on. Reporters from all major networks had shown up, drawn by the escalating controversy. Cameras clicked as he stepped to the microphone. "You know, a few nights ago, a fancy DC restaurant turned me away. Not because of who I am as a person, not because I did anything wrong, but because of my beliefs. Because I don't fit their version of acceptable." He paused, scanning the crowd. The energy was electric. But here in Ohio, we don't shut our doors on people we disagree with. We sit down, we talk, we eat together. That's what real America is about. The crowd erupted in cheers. Then JD took it a step further. "This isn't just about one restaurant. It's about the divide in this country between elites who think they own America and the people who actually make America work. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of giving my business to some elitist DC hotspot, I'm going to highlight real American businesses that welcome everyone, no matter their politics." He turned to Mary, the diner's owner, and shook her hand. "This is my first stop, but it won't be my last." The cameras caught every moment. The narrative had flipped. Instead of being a victim, JD had turned the situation into a movement, one that was about something much bigger than just him. And while conservatives rallied behind him, his enemies in Washington were seething. Because JD Vance wasn't just fighting back. He was winning. JD Vance's move sent shockwaves across the country. His speech in Ohio went viral, racking up millions of views across social media. The hashtag #EatWithEveryone trended as conservatives and moderates alike shared stories of diners, barbecue joints, and small restaurants that welcomed all customers, regardless of politics. Meanwhile, the Capitol Fork was drowning in controversy. Their Yelp page was locked due to unusual activity. Protesters, some supporting the restaurant, others against it, lined the sidewalks outside. The owner, a staunch progressive, finally broke her silence in an MSNBC interview. "Senator Vance is playing the victim," she claimed. "Our restaurant has a right to refuse service to anyone we believe is spreading dangerous ideas. This isn't about politics. It's about public safety." But the damage was done. JD had successfully reframed the debate. It was no longer about him. It was about who gets to decide who is welcome in America. However, his opponents weren't going down without a fight. The next day, a bombshell story dropped in the Washington Post. JD Vance's hypocrisy. Senator once supported businesses' right to refuse service. The article unearthed old comments JD had made about religious freedom cases, where conservative business owners refused to provide services for same-sex weddings. They painted him as a hypocrite, supporting a business's right to refuse service when it suited his beliefs but complaining when he was the one turned away. Liberal pundits seized on the story. On The View, Joy Behar smirked. So let me get this straight. He's fine with discrimination as long as it's against people he doesn't like? The headlines came fast and furious. JD Vance cries foul after experiencing a taste of his own medicine. The Atlantic. Republicans love free markets until they're the ones affected. HuffPost. JD Vance's phony culture war. Vox. JD's enemies thought they had him cornered. But they underestimated one thing. He had expected this attack. So instead of playing defense, he doubled down. That night, JD went back on Fox News, this time on Sean Hannity's show. You know, the left loves to twist the truth, JD said, looking straight into the camera. But let's be clear. There's a huge difference between a private business upholding their religious beliefs and a politically motivated restaurant banning someone just for their ideology. Hannity nodded. So what's your next move? JD smirked. I'm taking this fight straight to the American people. If they think I'm gonna back down, they've got another thing coming. And with that, he announced his next shocking move. JD Vance had seen the attacks coming from a mile away. The media was trying to turn the tables on him, but he wasn't going to let them control the narrative. He had one final move left, and it was about to shake things up even more. Instead of just talking about the issue, he decided to do something that no one saw coming. He announced the American Table Tour. This wouldn't be just a few PR stops at diners in red state America. No, JD Vance was going to everyday restaurants across the country, highlighting businesses that embraced free speech, open dialogue, and American values. And he wasn't doing it alone. He invited everyday Americans to nominate restaurants that welcomed all people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, and everything in between. The goal? To show that real America wasn't like the elitist circles of DC. The moment he made the announcement, his campaign website crashed from traffic. Thousands of small business owners reached out, eager to be featured. Conservative media called it brilliant. Even some moderate liberals, sick of political division, found themselves intrigued. And then came the kicker. JD challenged the owner of the Capitol Fork to sit down with him at a neutral restaurant and have a meal together. No cameras, no media circus. Just two people from different sides of the aisle talking like Americans should. The response? Silence. The restaurant refused. The owner dismissed JD's challenge as a stunt. The left-wing media tried to spin it, but the optics were disastrous. JD Vance was willing to break bread with his opponents. The elites? They weren't even willing to sit at the same table. The final nail in the coffin? JD's first stop on the tour was in none other than Washington, D.C. itself, at a black-owned soul food restaurant that proudly served everyone. The owner, a lifelong Democrat, shook JD's hand in front of a roaring crowd and said, "I may not agree with him, but I'll serve him, because that's what America is supposed to be." The media scrambled. The left had lost control of the narrative. And JD Vance? He walked away from the controversy not as a victim, but as a leader.